Senators will soon hopefully vote on a $2 trillion bill that will deliver direct cash payments to struggling Americans. No fault of their own. This came out of nowhere. Nobody can imagine this even happened.
Liar, liar, your pants on fire.
Folks, welcome to the program. You're listening to Diverging Perspective. This is your host, Patrick Penry, and you've just heard Trump claim that this came out of nowhere. Nobody could imagine this even happened. This appears to be part of the narrative that they're pushing repeatedly. I've heard this several times from him now. We couldn't have known this could have happened. How could we have predicted this? Who could have known? And this seems to be what they're just hammering us with, this narrative. They couldn't have known. Well, folks, before I show you some evidence here that Trump likely did know, let's go back and talk about the CDC, $11.1 billion per fiscal year 2018. Talk about the bioweapon labs and DARPA. Let's talk about the Joint Chief of Staff and the CIA. These entities, basically part of what they do is to prepare for a pandemic, to prepare for bioweapon attack from Russia, from China. CDC, certainly this is their bread and butter. If you look back at the swine flu, we've been through this already once before with the swine flu. If you look at the bioweapon labs and DARPA, this is what they do, is engineer these weaponized forms of viruses. They certainly must know about pandemics, epidemics, bioweaponized forms of viruses. Joint Chief of Staff, same thing. Come up with things like Operation Northwoods, these schemes and plans, countermeasures, attack plans too, but countermeasures, that kind of thing. And the CIA, certainly, they must know about pandemics. They must know about weaponized viruses, et cetera, et cetera. So there's four groups right there. Who could have known? Who could have thunk? Who in those four groups could have predicted this? They couldn't have known. They couldn't have known. Now, folks, I want to read to you now some information I dug up yesterday, and this is about Bill Gates and Donald Trump. Let me read to you from the Business Insider. I got a couple clips I want to read, then we'll talk briefly about it, and I'll be on my way. From Business Insider, Bill Gates has repeatedly stated that he sees a pandemic as the greatest immediate threat to humanity on the planet. Quote, whether it occurs by a quirk of nature or at the hand of a terrorist, epidemiologists say a fast-moving, airborne pathogen could kill more than 30 million people in less than a year, Gates wrote in an op-ed for Business Insider last year. And they say there is a reasonable probability the world will experience such an outbreak in the next 10 to 15 years. Again, from another Business Insider article, they're talking about Bill and Melinda Gates. It says the biggest global risk Melinda Gates can imagine is, quote, most definitely, end quote, a bioterrorism attack, she said in an interview at South by Southwest. Again, Business Insider, another article about Bill Gates and talking about the viruses and pandemics. It says Bill Gates makes a speech at the Malaria Summit at 8 Northumberland Avenue on April 18, 2018 in London, England. So he's touring around the world. For my research, about 10 years, he's been touring around talking about pandemics, epidemics, Ebola, malaria, AIDS, asking for funding from governments around the world to fight these particular diseases and viruses. The next deadly disease that will cause a global pandemic is coming, Bill Gates said on Friday at a discussion of epidemics. Check out the next clip. And here's a title from the article. Bill Gates thinks the coming disease could kill 30 million people within 6 months and says we should prepare for it as we do for war. I don't know if you've noticed they've been using that word war a lot. I'm a wartime president. This is a war, so on and so forth. Here's another clip to read. In a 2015 TED talk, Gates said the world was, quote, not ready for the next epidemic, end quote. And in a 2018 discussion about epidemics hosted by the Massachusetts Medical Society and the New England Journal of Medicine, Gates said a pandemic could happen within the next decade. He presented a simulation by the Institute for Disease Modeling, which found that a new flu like the one that killed 50 million people in the 1918 pandemic would now most likely kill 30 million people within 6 months. The likelihood that such a disease will appear continues to rise in our interconnected world, he said, whether it happens naturally or is created as a weaponized disease. Here's from CNN Business. Now I want to show you where Donald Trump's been meeting with Bill Gates on a semi-regular basis. And my point to this whole video is they've met multiple times. Bill Gates' whole spiel is about pandemics and viruses and that kind of thing, and to ask for money for them. When you look at some of these articles, Donald Trump was proposing cutting these particular programs, and Bill Gates is meeting with him to convince him, no, don't cut these programs. These are programs we need. Title of the article, President Donald Trump will meet Monday with billionaire philanthropist Bill Gates. Down here it says, spending money on other countries makes Americans safer, Gates argued. U.S. aid can help stabilize volatile and vulnerable parts of the world, combat the outbreaks of epidemics, and strengthen the market for U.S. goods. And at the bottom it says, the Trump budget proposal proposes deep cuts in foreign aid. Quote, it is time to prioritize the security and well-being of Americans and to ask the rest of the world to step up and pay its fair share, the administration wrote. So that's Donald Trump wanting to slash programs, Bill Gates not wanting him to slash programs, and they're meeting on a semi-regular basis. Here's another article. There's a couple of these in the CNN Business I found. It says at the top, related, Bill Gates warns the world to prep for bioterrorism. That's his spiel. That's what he does for years. He's warning the world of bioterrorism and pandemics. And the bottom, I marked this part to read. This is not the first time since the election that Gates has met with Trump. He visited with Trump at Trump Tower in December, the day after he announced clean energy investment plans. Gates is set to meet with Trump at 11 a.m. at a White House meeting closed to the press. And this was first published on March 20, 2017. So when you look at his meetings, 2017, 2018, he's meeting with Donald Trump semi-regularly. The two are scheduled to meet this afternoon inside the Oval Office. According to Trump's public schedule released by the White House, the meeting is closed to the press. A source familiar with the agenda told CNN that foreign aid will likely be a topic of discussion. Gates and his wife Melinda spoke out against Trump's proposed cuts to foreign aid in the 2018 annual letter for their philanthropic foundation, saying U.S. efforts to combat disease and poverty abroad saves lives, creates jobs, and makes Americans more secure. There's those talking points again from Bill Gates right there. Trump and Gates will also likely talk about funding for scientific research, according to CNN source. Gates has emphasized the importance of these investments in prior meetings with Trump and encouraged the president to back an innovation agenda supporting research in health, education, and energy. Gates previously met with Trump in December 2016 at Trump Tower and again last March. So 2016, 2017, 2018, at least once a year he meets with Donald Trump. Okay, that's what I wanted to show you there, and I'll briefly remind you of the Event 201, which was sponsored by Bill and Melinda Gates, occurred on October 18, 2019, just a few months before the pandemic, and this was a simulated exercise with global elites and heads of state, so on and so forth, to talk about what to do in a pandemic, how to control the information, and about the economic consequences of a pandemic. So you also have a recent simulation exercise with meetings of really powerful, influential people, funded by Bill Gates, and I believe John Hopkins and some other groups are behind it. But just to show you, Bill Gates recently is still out there pushing this global pandemic narrative to people as recently as October 18, 2019. Meeting with Donald Trump multiple times. I'm finding it very difficult to believe that Donald Trump, that the military, the CDC, DARPA, Joint Chief of Staff, Central Intelligence Agency, no one in all these groups could have thought, could have predicted, could have known. This came out of nowhere, folks. How could they have known? Who would have known? So that is the point to this video. I hope you understand that something is terribly wrong when they all seem to have the same narrative. They're standing next to each other, ignoring their own protocol, and he keeps hammering us with this, who could have known, who could have known? Well, Bill Gates, if nobody else could have known, and he's been meeting with Donald Trump many times must talk about the same exact thing, because he's asking for funding, and to convince Donald Trump that he needs the funding, he's got to say, look, there could be a pandemic. We've got to get some money together and fight, because it's going to be like a war. And 10 years Bill's been going on about this. I just can't believe that Donald Trump has no idea about a possible pandemic. And furthermore, and I'll finish on this, I simply don't believe there's not a warehouse or warehouses somewhere within the continental U.S. that are stocked with a breather masks and suits and PPE and other things like that. Because in the event that a real bioweaponized virus is released, let's say, let's play pretend that Russia or China actually does release a weaponized virus, you better believe our military has preparations for that. We've spent trillions with them. They must be prepared for an actual bioweaponized attack, folks. Okay, I've gone on too long. I hope you got something out of this. This has been Diverging Perspective, and this is your host, Patrick Penry. Have a great day, stay safe, and stay healthy. Over and out.
When I was a kid, the disaster we worried about most was a nuclear war. That's why we had a barrel like this down in our basement, filled with cans of food and water. When the nuclear attack came, we were supposed to go downstairs, hunker down, and eat out of that barrel. Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes. Now, part of the reason for this is that we have invested a huge amount in nuclear deterrence, but we've actually invested very little in a system to stop an epidemic. We're not ready for the next epidemic.